Now, controversial measures which would have forced big tech companies to take down legal content deemed as harmful by the government have been scrapped from the online safety bill. Some Conservative MPs argue the proposals jeopardise free speech, but critics, including the Labour Party and the Samaritans, say dropping the plans is a backward step. Well, Professor Andrew Przybylski is an experimental psychologist and director of research at the Oxford Internet Institute. Professor, good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. First of all, what are your thoughts on the decision to remove this provision from the online safety bill?
I think it's just the latest in a set of tragedies surrounding this whole affair. It was entirely avoidable. Many experts warned the government and many stakeholders that everything was on a really shaky scientific foundation. Harms were never properly defined, they couldn't be tested, and many of the interventions that have been proposed, there's no way of knowing if they would even work. So, I mean, you could see this coming from a mile off, and many of us are really unhappy with the whole situation.
How could and how should the government have proceeded then in trying to deal with issues that, yes, you're right, it would be difficult to negotiate whether or not they are potentially harmful, and yet they remain legal? What should the government have done?
Well, I mean, obviously laws are terribly important, but one of the things here, because they're foundational, but one of the things here is that these are deadly serious problems. When we're talking about mental health and well-being of young people and people all across the population, we need to take these things as seriously as we take things like petrol or lead in paint. And there needs to be serious scientific study. We can't just make up words like harm and pretend like that gives us a golden key to kind of change the rules of how the internet works. And that means investing in science, and that means, you know, getting data from companies to learn about how these products and how these platforms actually influence us for good or bad. We can't just stick our heads in the sand about this.
Yeah, and the idea that perhaps free speech could have been curtailed as well. Do you have any truck with that suggestion?
I mean, there's always going to be a balance between liberties and protecting the most vulnerable in our society. And in order to make that type of informed decision as citizens, as scientists, as policymakers, we actually need a good evidence base. We need to figure out, you know, how much baby are we going to throw out with the bathwater? And if we just pretend like, you know, we know everything about this most recent panic about technology, and we ignore our previous panics and what we fail to learn scientifically about those, like comic books or movies or video games, we're just going to find ourselves in the same place in 5 or 10 years when a new technology comes along, new powerful companies come along, and the government and the civil sector is none the wiser.
What do you think big tech then should be doing to try to keep children safer? What do you think they can offer?
I think they have the most important resource imaginable here, which is they collect really fine-grained data on all of us over time. It's used for possibly one of the most boring things in the world, which is selling us things via ads. And that data is intensely valuable to people like me and people across the economy and across society to understand really how do we use these online spaces? What happens to a young person when they're playing Roblox and they switch over to Snapchat? How do they get around age verification? When do they start looking at pornography? If we don't have that data, we don't have something solid to act on and something solid to make, then we can't possibly regulate this in a mature way. And we can't kind of balance these things, like you say, about civil liberties, along with our values, along with what we want from these technologies in our society.
Okay. Professor Andrew Przybylski, it's good to get your perspective. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on, Clive.